Okay, good evening, good morning, everyone, depending what time zone you are in. It's wonderful to see you. I am Cristi Măcelaru. I'm the music director of the Cabrillo Festival of Contemporary Music. And I am joined today by three wonderful, wonderful composers that have been featured at our festival, which is in Santa Cruz, California. And for those of you that don't know about us, I will take just a few seconds to tell you we are a festival of contemporary music. We perform only contemporary music that is written today. We like to have our composers involved in the process of creating the performance itself as well, which is why we always like to have the composers with us in attendance throughout the process of the rehearsals and then the performance as well. So our audience and our community that supports this festival over the many years that it has been in existence has learned to get very close and personal with the composers, which we really, really enjoy every summer. It is also the premier orchestral festival for contemporary music, which happens every summer in Santa Cruz, California. And we are very proud to be able to offer a little insight into three of the composers, as I said, that we have featured in the past many times. Of course, I'm talking about Clyne, who is joining us. I'm talking about Clarice Assad and Kevin Putt. So I am so happy to see all of you. And let's start with just a simple question. How are you doing? Clarice, do you want to start?
I'm happy to be here, happy to be part of this conversation, doing very well, all things considered, with this situation that we're living. Yeah, I'll pass the ball to Anna.
Yes, let's ask Anna. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's great to be here and to see some familiar faces and feeling grateful to have music during this time and to have space to be composing and looking out the window, seeing the beginnings of spring makes me feel very happy. So.
Wonderful. Kevin?
Doing, all things considered, just fine. It's been for composers, it's been a bit of a different situation this year than it's been for performers. So, we've been able to keep working to some degree on future projects. And so that's been good, and really is great to connect with Cabrillo. I've had so many memorable, magical experiences in Santa Cruz over the years. So it's great to see everybody.
I'm also reminding everyone listening to us that if you have any questions that you want to ask our composers, please feel free to write them in the chat, and then I will be able to see them and then ask the questions. Now, I always feel very lucky because as a conductor, as the music director of the Cabrillo Festival, I get to work with all you fine people. And it's really, to me, music actually is so much more than just abstract representation. And knowing your music, all, the three of you, I know that music goes beyond that. Music is, sharing an expression, sharing something that is deeply, deeply personal. And I always feel I'm always cautious entering that space because it's a very personal space. When you put your feelings, your thoughts on a piece of paper, and then you hand them over to someone else, in some ways you're like inviting them into your heart, right? You're inviting them to see something that is really, really deeply personal. And I know, Clarice, I know that you're also a very, very active performer as well. So you kind of live a little bit on both sides of this interaction. Can you tell me a little bit about how does it feel to let go of the performer when you put things on the paper, or what is that process like for you?
As far as like working with somebody like you, I feel like to me it's a collaboration. I'm of course giving something that came out of my head, but I see you as somebody who can realize those ideas. It's like I couldn't do that because I couldn't get in front of an orchestra and conduct. I don't do that. I don't know how to do that. So we need to have conversations and decide things together. I really love that very much. The process of, you know, being just overlooking, like, this is really what I would like to hear, but what do you think? Do you think it can be even more of what I imagined? And, you know,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, because it's, you know, knowing your music, I always feel like with you, the score that I receive, it's like the beginning of the conversation. It's like the beginning where we start to sort of riff off each other, rather than, okay, this is the ultimate thing, please don't add anything. You know, and there are composers that love them.
You're right. I really like to give freedom to people to do whatever they want in certain parts of the music. So I don't know if you remember that score that we did together with Evelyn Lenny, that you had a lot of improvisation to do yourself.
I remember.
You were improvising with her, and the orchestra was following the two of you. It was like really amazing, the concentration between all of you. And I liked doing that. I want to do more of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think people imagine that improvisation is something that there's absolutely no structure or no thought that goes into it. You just do whatever, but it's actually not. There's a lot of thought that goes behind improvisation.
Sometimes it takes more work to figure that out than to write exactly what you want, right?
Exactly. Kevin, you seem to be in agreement with what we're saying.
It's going like that.
I'm just interested in, because maybe I'm one of those composers. I don't put a lot of improvisation into my pieces, and so, you know, for me, I'm always trying to find out things about the music and about how it could be played, and the various different ways that something could be written from performers. And I find it actually very hard a lot of the time, because in many cases, if I show something to a performer and they see the notation, they just take it like this is how it should be. And so it's very fun. It's sometimes hard for me, you know, to say, well, actually, it's much more flexible than you think, you know. Really, I'm just thinking, well, the harmony, maybe I can't change that. The harmony is something that I'm pretty religious about. But yeah, exactly. How do you play your arpeggio or your line or the melody or how the string crossing or whatever? It's all, I want to know, you know, what's the best way. And so that's always constantly a tough thing for me, to try to figure out how to get that information and the best way to do it. Because I do think, I mean, in the best circumstances, you know, to give someone a score and have my intentions, you know, the things that I do care about recorded in the score, and I try not to be too crazily, you know, specific, because I mean, I know as a performer, you know, playing music that's you feel like you're in a straitjacket if there's too much information. But, you know, just enough that I get my intentions are there. And then it's really interesting to hear like somebody like what I remember one of the performances the only performance I think that you've done so far of my work at San Francisco Symphony, that you had a very different concept of the end of the piece. And it was so fascinating. And over the week, it changed my entire, you know, way of thinking about the proportions of the piece. And so that kind of collaboration is so rewarding.
Yeah, I mean, I love being able to sometimes challenge composers, you know, because I think I like to be challenged, and it's funny because I, especially with younger composers, the first time that we meet, I tell them, just because I suggest something, it doesn't mean you have to say yes, you know, because there is a little bit, especially as a very young composer, you try to sort of accept whatever the performer suggests, thinking that they know better. And actually, Anna, this reminds me when we did the cello concerto, which was, I think, the last project we did together in Cabrillo. There were a couple of places where I think I made some suggestions, and then we did that at the rehearsal, and you said, okay, sure, let's try. And then the next day we came back, and we both realized that my suggestions were actually not the right thing. And we went back to what you had initially put down on paper, you know, and I love to be challenged this way. You know, I love to be challenged where my own limitations do not become the interpretation. You know, it's actually something that perhaps it needs to be better in a different way, or we need to see it in a different way. And there's a question here for you, Anna, from someone that says, you have used visual art, your own drawing, to inform composing. Do you still do that?
Yeah, I started doing that with a piece called Night Ferry, which we did at Cabrillo, I think about 6 years ago. But it is something that I continue to do. When I'm starting a piece, sometimes I'll start with a rhythmic or melodic idea, something at the piano, but sometimes I start with I have an image of something, so I'll try and paint it. I'm not a painter, but just to try and get it out of me and then translate that into music. So yeah, it's my art, or sometimes I'll write a piece inspired by someone else's art as well.
Mm. I have to say, I was watching a video of one of your pieces being performed by an orchestra, and it's, you know, it was very intense. There was a moment that was very, very intense, and then, as it so often happens in your music, after a moment of deep intensity, there's actually a moment of incredible joy, or incredible deep content, you know, but in some ways it's relaxing, you know. And the video, the way that it was made, it just showed all the musicians in the orchestra, and literally every single person was smiling. You know, when this beautiful music came, and it was a beautiful climax, you know, and every single person in the orchestra was smiling, and it instantly gave me an image of how I feel when I perform your music. You know, there are so many moments that I find myself feeling this incredible sense of joy, like pure happiness. You know, I don't know, there is no other way to describe it, you know. And is this how you feel when you write? Like, are you trying to portray this, or how does that translate? I don't really know how to ask the question, but is this your intent to provide a sentiment or an emotion, or it just happens that we arrive there in a musical way?
I think it just sort of happens. When I'm writing, I have a pair of wireless headphones, and I use playback a lot in the process of composing. So once I have a couple of minutes, I'll put on my headphones and imagine that I'm a dancer. I'm also not a dancer, but to connect with the physicality of the sound. So if it's been something very intense for a couple of minutes, I imagine if I was dancing, that I would want something that kind of opens up and relaxes in a different way. And I think that's part of the reason my music kind of meanders a bit through different sort of emotional states.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful.
Yeah, well, this leads to one of the questions that we have, actually, and someone is wondering for all three of you, how, you know, which is a very, very basic question, but actually I think people are fascinated, or they want to find out, like, what is that first thing that you put on a piece of paper when you write a new work? Like, what is your, I'm obsessed with the process itself, you know. Like, I think Stravinsky said that he loved writing music more than composing, you know, like the actual pen to paper. If you do it this way, like, do you have to be in a zone? Like, how do you decide that? What's that moment like, the first moment, Clarice?
Oh, me? Oh my goodness, that's hard. I think that for me, if I'm doing something at the piano, just playing whatever, not thinking about it, that's often how things go. That I'll play things that for the most part I will absolutely hate. Like, oh, this is so cliche. Oh, this is awful. And then all of a sudden I'll do something that will, like, whoa, this is nice. And then I will do it again, and then I'll do it again, and then again, and then again. And then all of a sudden I have something to go with. And I think that's what I will call inspiration. But before getting to that point, there's a little bit of a struggle of a lot of debate in the head saying, you've done that, well, this is no good, or a lot of criticism. You know, I have to get past that, and then I'll find something I can work with. I don't know if I'm explaining it well.
Yeah, but do you try to stay away from repeating yourself?
Oh, I do. It's important to me for my growth as a creative person, not to do exactly something I've done before, or I'll try, you know, new projects, or I'll try new ways of orchestrating, but I won't repeat myself if I can help it.
Interesting. You know, it's interesting that you say that, because I mean, I always thought that you have a very distinct voice. You know what I mean? Like as a compositional voice, and it's interesting to hear that you tried not to do something that you've done before, but somehow your own voice comes through, whichever way you're changing the music. You know, so I think that's it's something, in some ways, it's something we can't get rid of, right? It's who we are. Music represents who we are.
That's very true.
Yeah. Kevin, paper, pen, computer, what's your process?
Oh, yeah, I was just thinking about since you've brought this question up, that it's so important, you know, the beginning of a piece is so important, and how you sort of, you know, get the access point, you know, for us, you know, how that's done. And I always find, for me, you know, every piece that I write, that I know I'm going to write, you know, let's say I have a project, it's 2 years or 3 years from now, there's still a part of me that's always thinking about what that will be and how it will start. Because for me, the beginning is so important, like the entrance into this journey is, and it has to be right. And we always know when it's right. I mean, for me, I always know when this is it, and I know when it's not it. And usually when it's not right, I can't continue very, very easily. I try, but I'm just not confident in it. But the moment that I figure out, or that I know how something will begin, always it's on the piano, and it could be in the middle of something I'm doing, like composing something else or orchestrating something. I feel at this moment I have some idea of what this other piece could be, and I just have to kind of play it. And I usually don't write it down, because when you write it down, it becomes very concrete, and it becomes hard for me to see any other way. And so I try to keep it very, very vague, like just any sort of an emotional, general emotional sort of place, and maybe harmony where I want to begin, and try to leave it at that, because it's so that I can return to it in the months ahead. And I don't know if that makes sense, but it's hard. It's important, you know, this moment. And then composing, as Stravinsky said, I guess, and this is what's so hard for young composers, and you try to learn over time, is, what do you do with that idea? Like, how do you keep it going? How do you make it go somewhere? How do you introduce new ideas and then return to the first idea? You know, all of that is a totally different process than just listening for that first moment and knowing what that is.
Yeah, I've composed very, very little in my life. I'm not a composer at all. I've tried composing just because I was fascinated by the process and trying to understand a little bit. But for me, it was really strange, because whenever I would try to improvise on the violin, because that's what I played, and I would try to improvise, and the musical thoughts would go too fast for me to be able to put them down on paper, right? And then when I would start to put them down on paper, I would be too slow at notating what was writing, and it was becoming very frustrating, because then I felt like I would have to backtrack, and then things would change so much in what I was writing on paper versus what I was just naturally improvising. You know, that I started feeling like actually these were two very separate things, you know, where improvisation was in the moment, where for me, writing things down on paper became the process. You know what I mean? So it was kind of bizarre. But of course, I'm no composer. I'm just telling you my own. I'm just wondering, do you have that? Clarice, do you have that, where like things are developing so quickly that you just don't have enough time to put them on paper? You know, and then you put up on paper, it's something else.
I use this. I sing to my phone. But, you know, I sing the melodies or whatever I have, and then sometimes I have a bass line and I just like label it. Oh, this is the bass line. And then I go back to it later. But before the phones, I used to call my answering machine at home. It was pathetic. I like go home and have like lots of ideas in music that I'm like, this is good. I can go with that.
And I'm curious, do you ever find yourself in a musical puzzle, so to speak, you know, where you're developing an idea, you're working on an idea, and then you get to a point where you don't know, like, should it go this way or should it go this way, right? Which of course it will influence the way that it develops, right? That certain idea. And how do you make that choice? Like, do you try both ways and then see what you prefer, or do you come back, or you know, if you get stuck, you just move to another completely different idea, or what is your process like that?
Well, I always start at the piano with pen and paper, and so that's where I find my original idea. And then as I'm writing, I always start at the beginning. I know some people will do like start at the end and then go back, but it's very much through compose. So I'll write a couple of minutes, spend some time with that, and just an additive process, but always going back to the beginning and listening, then adding, going back to the beginning, listening and adding, and just to get a sense of, you know, going into a composition, we have a few parameters. We know how long it's going to be, what the instruments are for, and when the deadline is. But knowing the sort of form, the how long it's going to be is really helpful. So sometimes on a piece of paper, if it's a longer piece, I'll divide it up in X number of minutes. So I know that I want to spend only a certain amount of time in one sound world before I want to shift gears. But it's very, very intuitive, I guess, as to how long to stay with something before moving along.
Yeah, and I've heard people describe this concept of figuring out the form of a piece, you know, or the architecture of a piece as something that sometimes they do independently of the sound itself. You know, they do it as okay, I need that in order for this dramatic, Kevin, maybe in an opera, certainly this has to do with figuring these dramatic moments and how much spacing there needs to be, right?
Yeah, I mean, yes. Of course, with an opera, so much is given to you to start, you know, because you have this libretto, which determines, to some extent, the architecture of the piece. And then I think what actually is fascinating about that process is when music, you know, does the musical form exactly correspond to the drama in the libretto that the libretto would suggest, or are there moments when the two are not quite in sync, which can be very interesting. But I mean, you know, from my experience, I'm now in the middle of working on my fourth opera, and when you go from an opera back to an orchestra piece or a string quartet, it's very difficult because, you know, nothing, you're given no guidance. You know, you could go anywhere you want. And so I find that I have to get back into that mode of determining the architecture based on, and for me, it's very much like Anna was saying, it's from the beginning, it's very intuitive, and I like to discover the form as I go rather than determining it like you had mentioned beforehand. I like to figure it out as I go. That's part of what's fun for me about composing.
Mm-mm-mm. And do you find yourself that sometimes you arrive in a place where you didn't expect it when you started?
Yes, and that's what's so exciting to me. And I found when I have done the other, you know, let's say I came up with some chunk of music and I want to get there, like I want to arrive there. It doesn't work, you know, because music is so it's so precise. You know, everything about the arrival of something has to be determined by what came before. And so when you get there, it could be totally different, and it didn't work. But that would, early on, that's what I would try to do, like write these chunks of music and try to connect them all. And it didn't really. It was very challenging.
Yeah. There is a question actually, and I can any of you can sign up to answer. It says from Cheryl Spencer: if you are awarded a commission, how do you respond to it being very prescribed? Anna.
Prescribed in terms of like the subject matter, or
I'm imagining something that is closely tied to either a subject matter or yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes you just have to find your own way into that subject matter. It could be quite loose, or it could be quite like sometimes we'll be asked to respond to a specific piece of music. So you could you know, if wanted the atmosphere of a piece, or what if I'm asked that particular thing, I'll find like little gestures that I can put through my own lens. But yeah, it depends. I know some composers don't like to be told what it should be about, but I find it can be really helpful to give a point of departure.
Clarice, how about you?
Well, I'm with Anna on that totally. I also, because of just my personality, I like to discuss ideas with whoever's going to be playing my music, because ultimately, as a performer, I know that I'm only choosing music that I really love to play when I'm curating my own, let's say, concert, right? I put the program together and I'm like, what do I really love to play? So I will make that choice. And if I'm writing for somebody who's going to play my music, I want to make sure that they have the same passion for playing it that I have, you know, creating it for them. If I can't do that, then I'll have a long conversation about how we can collaborate in that way to get the best of the experience.
And before I ask you the same question, Kevin, Clarice, can you tell a little bit just practically how this works? Because someone is asking a question of how much freedom do you leave to the performer and how much of what you write is fixed on paper, right? And you do both actually a lot in your music. So how exactly do you, like, how do you do this? Can you just explain to us?
Well, for example, I've been in situations where I wanted to put like a chanting of indigenous Brazilian languages in the middle of this orchestral piece. And I'm like, ooh, this is dangerous territory, because not everybody's going to be like into singing, you know, from their stands. And so I will ask, like straight out, can I do this? Would it be okay? And I will make it like an ossia also. Like I'll make the piece work without that so that they don't have to. So I'm giving them options. You know what I mean? That's what I mean by, we'll see what happens when I'm there. Let's try with and without, and then decide together what it's going to be.
Yeah, I have to say one of my many beautiful moments, but one of my moments that I come back to in my heart actually was doing your piece for the family concert, because, and what really struck me is I really thought it was going to be crazy trying to do with a laser pointer, you know, to get the audience to sing. Do you remember this whole thing?
I'll never forget it.
But, you know, and of course, I knew that something was going to come out, but I didn't know that it was going to be so spiritual and beautiful. And I really mean that. And, you know, an entire audience singing at the same time on the spot, not expecting, right? And
Yeah,
see, it really brought tears to my eyes, because it's such a unifying concept. The fact that we all use our voices as best we can, and we are creating the same sound together. You know, that is, it goes so far beyond a political understanding of what it means to be united. You know, it goes deeper than that. You know, it goes in the...
It's universal too. Everybody knew what to sing.
Exactly. That's what was amazing. Like you just point, you know, pa, 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 and they just did it. They did it. You know, it's amazing what we take for granted. You know, I think, yeah. So Kevin, let's come back to the question about how do you deal with a commission that is very prescribed, you know, from...
Yeah. I don't need total freedom. I find it just fine to be given some, you know, guidelines or something that, you know, I always think there's a long time. I just always remember this moment. My parents, a long time ago when I was a kid, they sort of commissioned their friend who makes stained glass windows to make a very small window for our stairwell in Michigan, the small town where I grew up in Michigan. And I just remember they talked a little bit about it, you know, and then she went away and made this window. And then she showed it to my parents. And I don't know, for some reason, I always think about that, like that she was given a little bit of information about the size of it and maybe some of the colors, maybe, but otherwise, what can she do within those guidelines? And I feel I'm that kind of composer. You know, I have friends and colleagues who write, this is, believe it or not, write a piece of music just off from their own mind and heart, and just comes out, and then they find someone to commission it. It's really like a totally different process, which is fine. For me, I like when someone says, we like something that would be about this size, and you know, and maybe about this subject, or and then I'm left to be as free as I can be within those parameters. I actually like that process.
So how do you deal with you know, I'll tell you a small little story, but I was supposed to premiere a piece that was commissioned for my orchestra in Germany, and the composer requested a certain number of string players, right? And came up with this divisi scheme that involved everyone, and then of course, because of the current situation, we were not allowed that many people on stage. And we're not talking about cutting the piece in half. It was, we were missing 4 double basses instead of, I mean, we needed 4 instead of 3. And I could only offer 3 double basses, not 4. And they pulled the piece. And they said, no, I'm gonna wait until this is possible. We're not gonna, and this was the only, so, which of course I respect. It's someone's creative output. They've put a lot of thought into this, and they needed that 4th bass line. I'm just curious, how much practicality, or how much practical freedom do you allow, especially in a time like this? Like, would you wait for a piece to be premiered until after the current situation is over? Or would you allow it with 3 basses? Just curious. Clarice, I think we know your answer, right?
No, just like of course I would like forget the bass. That's not important. We'll find another way. Well, I like to solve problems. Like, if that seems like a problem to be solved to me, if there's not rearrange it, find a way, you know, make it happen. That's how
I think specifically in that case, 3 is fine. I mean, like, I understand that they're divisi lines, and so that might take some reworking, you know, but that would be possible. But what would be tough if it were only 2? I mean, if you were looking for a unison sound, 2 is not so good. 3 or 4 is so, you know. But when I still have it performed, that's another. I'd probably find a way to do it.
That's when the arranger in me comes out too. Because it's like a whole different thing, composing and arranging, I think. Like, oh, you can arrange that differently and make it work.
Well, it's amazing to me, you know, you read these stories of people like Mozart, and even in the 20th century, you know, I remember hearing stories about Stokowski and how he started orchestrating this music, is because his concept was, well, we got a big orchestra and they're gonna play. You know, like, I don't care if it's a Haydn symphony and it doesn't have a contrabassoon. Like, they are here, they're present, I'm paying a salary, they're gonna play the contrabass part on the contrabassoon, period, right? And then it ended up growing into this massive arrangements of things that he would do that are, you know, and, but even Mozart, right? Mozart could not have conceived performing Messiah without rearranging it to suit the orchestra that he had at hand. Right? Isn't that interesting as a concept? Because he wanted to keep the music fresh. He wanted to make the music new, and he was using someone else's music. It was Messiah, but he reorchestrated it. And he added clarinets and added, you know, all these instruments to it to make it what he had available to him, right? Anna, what do you think about that?
I think it's great. I mean, I think one thing that this year has taught us is to be flexible and to be open to trying new things. And yeah, I think sometimes it's good to do something you didn't originally imagine, and it can give you a surprise that, you know, you wouldn't have thought of. So
yeah. We have another question here that says, how do you decide the size of an ensemble you write for if you have total freedom? Like, how do you decide that? Like if you have complete freedom, like is there a sort of desert island piece that you want to write for yourself, and what would that be? Can you share with us, or you don't have to, you know, someone might commission it, you know.
Well, I guess I would do something. I like big, rich textures, and I would probably, you know, do something really big. It would be fun sometime to use an enormous orchestra, you know, eight horns, and you know, I've never done something that big before. That might be, you know, if there were enough interest in that, that would be fun to try that. Something just like with a really huge orchestration.
Theremin? No theremin?
Oh well, it could be. Actually, I'm writing an opera right now for the Met, and I feel I'm doing things that are not practical in any other a place, you know. But I'm using, like, you know, a lot of percussion and a big orchestra and two harps. Never used two harps before. I'm hoping to use some Indian oboes called gyaling, which for this one moment that I just feel like we need something that's like a sound no one's expecting. And I realized that it's probably never, you know, like other companies aren't going to be able to do it. And, you know, but I'm just like, I have the opportunity, you know, I'm going to just do it anyway. So but usually I try to be more practical, you know, like, you know, I don't put a fourth trumpet in because some orchestras don't want to have a fourth trumpet. So anyway.
Right. So there is a reason why you're using the instruments that you are. It's not just to show that you can, right?
Yeah. I mean, yes, there's definitely a reason. Yeah. The sound and the kind of the meaning of the music. But you know, I'm really traditional in the sense that in the way that I write for the symphony orchestra. I mean, there are composers who are much more imaginative, and, you know, splitting the orchestra up into three orchestras and things like that. And I've always been very, you know, triple winds and four horns. I mean, I guess because I love that the music has been written for that ensemble so much that I find there's plenty of variety of possibilities within it.
Mm-hmm. So a little bit on the same idea of experimenting, Anna, I know that you've used microtones and quarter tones and things like this in your music, right? So it's not just traditional harmonic, but bending the pitch and doing things like this, which sometimes can have an interesting reaction from the ensemble, you know, because it's something that musicians are not accustomed to doing 99% of the time. Of course, Cabrillo is the kind of place where we love those kind of challenges. In fact, I will share a little anecdote here, but in meeting with the orchestra, working for the new season for the virtual performances, and the musicians were all like, can we make sure that we don't lose the technical difficulties of the pieces that we usually perform? Like, we want this. We look forward to the challenge of the virtuosity that is required to be in the Cabrillo Festival Orchestra. So anyways, but do you, because you've written for, you know, many great orchestras, but traditional orchestras, you know, do you have were you ever met, you know, with sort of questions about why use that?
Not really. In some ways, I think I'm quite conservative. So rather than being specific about microtones, like you said, I might have like woodwinds like bend between one pitch and another, or strings doing little slides, which are quite idiosyncratic for the instruments. But I try to do them sort of sparingly, so there's not too much resistance. But Cabrillo is the dream orchestra because, like you said, they are excited about the challenge rather than it being, you know, problem. So, but in general, I haven't had too much resistance yet. Maybe I've been a bit cautious with it.
What about you, Clarice?
I think I lost the train of thought. What would be like
talking about
the dream ensemble piece?
No, talking about, oh yes, the dream ensemble piece. Yeah.
I think it would be like mixing my group with an orchestra. That would be amazing. That would be awesome, because I have a group of it's a jazz world music ensemble, but the percussionist plays all instruments that you can imagine from different countries and musical traditions. So that goes with what Anna was saying too, like things that are not really easily heard in a traditional orchestra. It would be very, very cool to do that.
Mm-mm-mm. Well, and there's a question here actually that someone is asking, which I think in some way you've already answered, because they say as audiences become less genre oriented, is the classical concert format essential to experiencing your music fully? What do you think, Clarice?
It's a hard question. Things are changing, like they have to change, right? They have to, because even though we're trying to put in a lot of borders around, it's all music in the end.
Mm.
And people are more accepting of new sounds, and I think there is a more open mind in general for the craving of new things, more and more, like more than before.
Mm-mm-mm. Yeah, Kevin, what do you think?
You mean like the format of the concert? Is that like just the way it's presented? Does it have to be in that setting?
Or does it have to be like for your music to be appreciated fully? Does it have to be presented in a classical music concert, or can it be interjected with other genres?
That's a really interesting question. Yeah, because there is a kind of feel to like what is acceptable, or what sort of belongs in the concert hall. And in a lot of cases, when you go to a standard symphony orchestra concert, there's that feeling in the room, and I don't know if it's a good thing. I don't know what the expectation is. I don't know what those limits are exactly, but whether or not my music, I mean, I don't think so. I mean, a lot of times people have said my music sounds cinematic, and I think it could be. I don't think it's. Sometimes it doesn't belong. I mean, there are pieces I've written that I think don't belong in a concert hall. They're just. I don't know. They don't conform to what people's expectations of contemporary classical music are, and that's fine with me. I just wanted to write it anyway, and. So I guess not. It was the answer. I guess not. It doesn't have to be. So.
Well, and composers, there were trends actually, sort of once a century. There were trends where composers became really obsessed with folk elements, right, and introducing music from either their own past or some adopted culture that they were part of, where they introduced those elements in the music. And Anna, you do that actually beautifully quite often in your music. Like you can definitely hear a certain folk element in your music. Is this your intent, or is this just your voice that naturally comes through?
I think it's the voice that naturally comes through. And my father's Jewish and my mother's from Irish. So I think those two musics, like, I love writing in 6/8, that kind of lilting, and then some of the sort of more Jewish inflections I really love. But going back to what we were talking about a little while ago about not repeating yourself, that's always the challenge. Is my tendency is to always go to those sort of melodic ideas. So I try and challenge myself to not always do them in that way. Like, how can I use orchestration to change it? Or like in one piece, I tried using a 12-tone row to shift away from doing like a folk melody, but it still sounded kind of folk-like, but using different tools to get away from, I think in the heart of my music is that folk music from my background. So.
As a performer, and when I study music, I have to say almost nothing gives me as much pleasure as being able to recognize a little hidden signature of something that I have noticed in another piece. Like I love that. So I think maybe I understand why composers, oftentimes try to say, okay, it has to be something that I'm not repeating myself. But I think as performers, we are like, oh, we love that. Like we love to see that, you use the same gesture here, which is like an inside message, right? And performers obsess over the inside message, like, the way that this, like the Clara motive, for example, that Robert Schumann used, right? And that other composers around the same time started using Clara motive, and then it passed through, and then people today would make that gesture just sort of to give a hint to the Clara motive, which is this, descending interval that Robert Schumann always used to describe his affection for Clara. But like those little things, of course, those are not so much repeating yourself as, you know, creating a quote or creating a musical motive that becomes, yeah. And I remember talking to Cheryl, to my wife, and talking about, she plays the bassoon, and talking about contemporary bassoon writing. And she says, you know, there is a point in music history where composers should stop quoting The Rite of Spring, you know, just because that is the one go-to, I guess, little melodic snippet that immediately comes to mind when you think of the bassoon. So it's I guess it's a fine line between repeating yourself, but giving enough of yourself in a hidden way to the performer where they recognize that signature, you know, that recognize, yeah. So what are your projects that you're working on? Kevin, you said that you're in the middle of working on an opera for the Met.
Yeah,
Are you allowed to tell us more about it?
Oh yeah. It was announced a while ago. It's based on the Michael Cunningham book, The Hours, which was also a film with Nicole Kidman and Meryl Streep. So yeah, I'm doing it's a huge project. You know, it's a big orchestra. There's a big chorus, and of course the three ladies are the main characters who live in different time periods. You have Virginia Woolf and the 20s living outside of London, and then you have this character Laura who's in LA right after World War II, and her husband is, so she's living sort of a suburban lifestyle. And then a contemporary character, Clarissa, who is living in New York City. So I thought it would be an exciting project because the three characters, what you can do in opera that you can't do in a film or a book is that they can overlap. They can exist on the stage at the same time. You can have them sing duets and trios and stuff that transcend time. The time that the time periods that they're living in. So yeah, so I've been working on that. It's been a strange process because the workshops that we usually have for opera have been postponed, and so I ended up having to start orchestrating before we even heard a note of music sung. So it's an odd process, but it's getting done somehow. So that's what I'm working on.
And do you work simultaneously on more than one project?
Well, in this case, a little bit. I wrote a song in the middle of it, and we're going to record an old marimba concerto of mine. Marin Alsop is going to record it with Baltimore Symphony in June. So I did some revisions on that. It's about a 25-year-old piece. I kind of reorchestrate. I try to keep the music true to who I was then, but orchestrate it better. Based on everything you learn over the years. About what players need to see, like orchestra, just like notation. And so that I've been working on that while at the same time as the opera. So hopefully I do like to just do one thing at a time. I really feel better if I can just totally focus on one thing and then move on.
Mm-mm-mm. What about you, Clarice? You said you were busy doing all kinds of things when we were chatting before.
Yeah, well, that's such a great thing that Kevin just said about like going back 20 years and reorchestrating everything. It's like, oh, I want to do that too. No, but the biggest thing that I have happening is a project in Brazil, which is like a hybrid musical / opera multimedia project with only 3 opera singers, and then I have an ensemble of refugee musicians from all over the globe. So there are 25 people from 25 different countries. They all play multiple instruments. So that's really exciting. And that is in its initial stages now. So it's like I'm not in the same moment as Kevin just described, but it's a lot of work too. It's massive. Like the libretto is huge, and exciting, very challenging. It's going to teach me so much about this whole music thing that I thought I knew.
So when you were saying that you're excited about the idea, or you thought it was a good idea to go back and to change the orchestration of something, I oftentimes wonder, you have these critical editions that come out of composers, let's say, and I think editors, to try to create something unique, will publish 2 or 3 different versions of the same symphony. And sometimes it's clearly that one version was the first version that the composer wrote, which then they changed 1 or 2 years later, right? How do you feel about people coming back and saying, well, you know what, actually, I'm going to perform your earlier versions, not the one that you revised, right? Like, does that make you feel like, wait, I revised it for a reason, like I wanted this to change, or you're fine with that?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Oh, and that never happened to me. I've never had this experience, but I've had experience of having written music, put it out there, YouTube, let's say I wrote a guitar quartet, and then hear it in so many different versions. Like, people took the score and they did whatever. They did it for marimba, they orchestrated, they put guitars and drums. They have changed my music without ever asking for permission, and they just put it out there. I think it's amazing. I really enjoy it. Like, oh my God, look, they're doing it with like a marimba quartet. Sounded like a completely different piece, But I don't mind it. I'm okay as long as people are having fun and the music is being performed.
I would say, I know, I would love to hear what Anna says, but I would say no, absolutely. The reason I'm changing this piece is because it was bad. I mean, just because there are things that are they're just not well balanced, or notational things that don't really make sense to string players, and a way I can make this orchestra sound richer or more crisp in places, because I know more now. So I have no interest in people playing the older versions of pieces that I go back and revise, from my perspective. So
yeah, I think I have a similar feeling to Kevin, especially for orchestral music, because part of the process, it's never the final draft in the first version. You have to hear it and really go through it with a tooth comb, and that revision process is so laborious and it's part of it's to make a stronger piece. So yeah, the most current version is generally the one to go with.
Beautiful. And can you tell us something you're working on that you want to share?
Sure. I've been dipping my toes in vocal writing. So I just did a short, like a mini opera for LA Opera, which is for a socially distanced quintet with a soprano setting the poetry by Emily Dickinson. And it was in collaboration with Kim Brandstrup, who's a filmmaker and choreographer in London. So he's in the process of making the film. We just recorded it, so it should be coming out in June or July. So I'm really excited about that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, is there anything that you would like to ask one of the other composers? So do you have any, we have just a couple more minutes, but if you have any questions for each other, I would love to hear.
I do have a question for both of you. So when you revise a score, orchestral music score, what happens if the piece has already been recorded in the first version?
Well, that's a good question. I usually, the reason I'm revising the marimba concerto is because there is a feeling for me that when a piece gets recorded, then it's hard to go back, and the fact that it's such an old piece and it never was recorded, I'm trying to just do the best I can. There's another piece like that of mine that I revised because it's being played a lot more than I thought people would want to play it. It's based on Beethoven's 7th Symphony. It's called Inspiring Beethoven. I wrote it. It's one of those pieces there were limits placed. Like, we want it to be based on Beethoven's 7th Symphony, and this was like one of my first commissions when I was just out of school. And it was being played quite a bit, and and the parts were in bad shape. we needed to make more parts. And so I thought, oh, well, maybe now's a good time for me to make it better, you know? And that actually was recorded, but not by a very big, just by a college. Yeah, that's a good question. Once it's recorded, it does become, and also the other thing is that the scores get out in the world. You know, they get like in, you know, there are these companies that buy scores, you know, and then they put them in a library or something. And then, you know, they pick it up and it looks like this old version. And I always get worried that those are going to be performed, you know, that those old versions will be performed. I kind of want to like go around and just destroy them all, you know, but I don't know where they are. So.
What about you, Anna?
Yeah, I haven't had that situation, but I guess you just have to let it be. I mean, once things are out in the world, especially with the internet, you know, I guess we just have to accept. Clarice, have you ever had that experience where it's been recorded and you made significant changes?
Clarice, did you hear Anna's question?
Yes.
Have you had that experience?
Oh, you know, that's funny because I think internet was not great, so I didn't hear it. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I was just asking if you've had that experience with something that's been recorded and then you've made extensive changes after.
No, that never happened. But I wondered about it, so I asked you guys.
Cool. Well, the last question we have from Robert Levering, and he asks that, he says, do you want to compose pieces for Zoom/internet in the future? Who wants to go first?
I am done with Zoom. I want to be with people and perform with people and write for people who are in the same room. I wish we were in the same room right now. Though, you know, thank God for this. Otherwise, we couldn't even do this.
Yeah. So,
Kevin. You know, Anna was talking about this opera that she's doing for, is that will be a film, right? And that's going to be, yeah. I mean, I've seen some other, actually the librettist who I'm working with on this opera, Greg Pierce, wrote something with Nico Muhly, which was a film. It was filmed. It was just a small like piano and two singers, but it was very successful. And I think that's kind of interesting, actually, to make an opera film. I think that's something that maybe I would be interested in doing something like that.
And Anna, obviously, you've already done a little bit, yeah. Yeah,
and I've been one of the good things out of this awful year has been collaborating with other artists. So I did a piece with a UK-based artist, Jill Bradley, and we collaborated on 2 film pieces. And I've really enjoyed that process because there's been that dialogue, and the product is very much intended for distribution on the internet. So I think in some ways we're sort of reimagining how we share our work with audience now, like an online audience. It's quite exciting as well.
Well, I'll share just a tiny brief anecdote about a way that the internet came very handy in a new piece that I just recorded a couple of days ago, because it was full of extended techniques, you know. And one thing that the composer did, because it's so hard to print all those things, and the musicians usually, you know, like you can't put a video in the paper and all that. So what the composer did is, at the specific moment where you're supposed to do a specific extended technique, they just put a QR code. And then, you know, you take out your phone and and then it takes you directly to the video explaining what to do, which I thought was genius, right? Because that is the world we live in. And I thought it was really quite neat. And I had actually started wondering, because at first when he explained to me how he wrote the parts, I started wondering, wait a second, what if the piece was that? You know, like the musical notation and what the musician was actually supposed to do, it was all transmitted through QR codes here and there, because musical notation is somewhat of a QR code, right? Except that we read it and we interpret it in a certain way, and it leads us to your mind and your heart, right? I thought that was quite fascinating. So just there it is.
That's very cool.
Yeah. Well, believe it or not, we've been talking for about an hour, and I don't want to take more of your time. We really, really appreciate you spending this hour with us. I know that our community, our audience at the Cabrillo Festival of Contemporary Music absolutely loves you all, and we cannot wait to see you in person so that we can, I remember, I will never forget this, Clarice, the first time we ran into each other, or we met, as it was allowed, right, 2017, we gave each other a hug, and then you looked at me. Do you remember what you said?
That you seemed very like a cousin to me.
Yes, you looked at me and you said, "You look like my people." So anyways, but I will never forget that. So thank you so much for sharing, all of you sharing your beautiful music with us, and sharing your beautiful thoughts as well about creating that music and about everything else. Thank you to our audience as well listening to this. We look forward to seeing you next month when we continue these conversations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.